Analysis for Office is SAP's easy-to-use Excel-based application that delivers very powerful integration with BW queries and other data sources. It will be the primary tool used to manually enter planning data and to run planning sequences. The features of A4O is vast, and it can take a book on its own to cover all the functionality available. So this book will cover only the functions that are necessary for planning. We will go through the following features of A4O. Add queries to a workbook, add planning sequences to a workbook, and add buttons to the workbook. This lecture is based on Analysis for Office version 2.7 patch 2. When installing Analysis for Office, a new ribbon is displayed in Excel called Analysis with various groups. Now, in a new installation, some of these groups might not be available, and we can activate these groups or display these groups by going to File, Analysis, Customize Analysis, and Customize User Interface. We can then select the various groups that needs to be displayed or deactivated. So I can deactivate planning and see that the planning group disappears, and to reactivate it, simply follow the path again and go to planning. Now I can save my settings as well under a profile. We are now going to add queries to our workbook. We have two price planning queries that has to be added to the workbook. Since queries are defined as data sources, we click on Insert Data Sources and select Data Sources for Analysis. Then a history is displayed, or we can search for our queries. So in our case, it's TPRP1, and it's a wildcard, and we're going to restrict it to only queries, and we can search, and it will bring back the results. So I'm going to add the material group prices query, and double click will bring up the selection screen, and I can enter my variables as required. So OK, and my query is then embedded in the workbook. Now if everything is OK, I should be able to enter values, and the Save Data button should be highlighted. Now a useful feature is before I save the data, I can always revert back to a save state by going back to previous save state, and the enter data will disappear. I can also protect a cell against changes by locking the cell. And even if I enter data in that cell, the Save Data button will not appear. However, I can enter values into another cell, save that data, and the cell that was locked will not have the enter data in it. The data in this intersection is locked, and other users can't plan against this intersection or run planning sequence against this intersection either. I can unlock this intersection by going on display, and then users can enter data and run planning sequence against this intersection again until I click on change, which reverted back to change mode. So other users will not be able to enter data or run planning sequences against this data selection. We will now add a planning sequence to the workbook. In addition to manipulating data, it is useful to run calculations within the workbook. But before we can add the planning sequence, add the query TSLP1001Q001 to the workbook. The specification of the query is described in the activities section at the end of this chapter. So suppose we have the following values. So in my query, I go to prompts, and I look at my sales org 1710 version 101 for that period. We can see that there's no data. And the reason why there's no data is that we haven't copied data from version 100 to version 101. So if I display my query, so if I go to prompts to version 100, we can see data. And secondly, the query shows only posted values, and that's why not even master data is displayed in version 101. So let's go back to version 101, and OK. Now to add our planning sequence, we go to this design panel, and we access the design panel by clicking on display, and then accessing the planning sequences will be done in the components tab. So to add the planning sequence, we click on our workbook and say use planning sequence, and we enter a search. So TSLP should be enough. And there's our copy version planning sequence. So double click to select it. And we will now see the associated variables. So in this case, we have a target version, a source version, etc. The variables for a planning sequence can either be entered manually, selected from a drop-down, or can be obtained from another Excel cell. The first two options is available when the source is marked as members. So in this case, I can enter a value, for example, version 200, or select the value from a drop-down. So version 173, for example. If the business logic allows it, we can, for example, grab the version from another cell and use the value to populate the variable. But first we need an appropriate source. Let's assume that the selected version value type for the query will be the target version value type for the planning sequence. We can add the selected prompt variable to the workbook. And to do that, we add an info field. So I'm going to create additional cells in my workbook. And go to Analysis Design, Info Fields, and select Variables. So I select the query that I want. In this case, it's volume planning, and OK. My variables will then be displayed. I can then go to, for my target version, go to Cell, and then select the version, in this case 101, and say, select the cell. Variable will then be populated by whatever value I select in my variable prompt. So if I go to Analysis and go to Prompt, and go to 173, version 173 will then be used by my planning sequence. We have added the variables as an info field, but let's add several other info fields as well. Say, for example, we want to display the query name as the header of the report. We can go to Analysis Design and add the data source name by selecting my data source, and this will display the name. So I can format it. The next thing we want to show is when the data has last been updated. So again, Analysis Design, Info Fields, Last Data Update, and select our query. And we can see when the data has last been updated. Next, I want to show effective filters, but first let's go to a version where there's already data. So I'm going to go to version 100. And let's add the effective filters. So these filters are everything that has been defined in transaction RSS plans filters, as well as those values selected during navigation. So if I go to Material and I say Filter by Member and select 3 materials, say, those values will also be displayed under my effective filters. So one of the last steps remaining is to execute the planning sequence. Now we're going to copy data from version 0, value type 10, to our target version 101, value type 20. Right, so we're going to our planning sequence and set our source version as version 0, value type 10. And we know that it picks up our target version from a prompt. So to execute it, we simply go to our planning sequence and say execute planning sequence. So we can see that the data has now been populated in version 101, so copied from version 0, and we can save the data. And the system also issues messages which we can display by clicking on the Messages button. Adding buttons is a great way to enhance the usability of a planning workbook. The user will no longer have to select frequently used functions to save, refresh, reset, and planning functions from the ribbon or display panel, but can directly access it from the workbook. Adding these functions require a little bit of VB knowledge, but the guide provided by SAP is sufficiently detailed to simply copy and paste most of the code. We are now going to create 2 buttons, one for saving the data and one for executing the copy sequence. The first step is to add the buttons to the worksheet. So you can see I've already added several buttons. Next, we're going to add the code, and we do this in the developer ribbon under view code. And we're going to paste the code under module 1. So simply cut and paste the code from the reference guide and add it to module 1. So we can see we've got code for save data, where we're going to execute the command plan data save. And next we're going to run planning sequence 1. So execute planning sequence PS1. And when we're happy with the code, we can save. So the alias for the planning sequence, the code PS1, can be derived from the formula alias, or it is specified next to the name of the planning sequence. Next, we need to connect our buttons to the various pieces of code. So I'm going to right click on my button and say assign macro and select save data. And for my copy button, assign macro and assign the run planning sequence 1 macro as well. So then I simply exit design mode. And now if I go to analysis, version 103, for example, I can click on the button and the planning sequence is run and my version has been populated. So I can press the save data button as well. We have now created a workbook and added queries and planning sequences to them. We have some of the building blocks to create planning applications, but not all yet. Next, we are going to cover more of the standard planning functions and move on to custom formulas as well. Planning functions manipulate data in info providers. We have already created a basic copy function,